Right now, you smell like something, and you chose it. You put deodorant on this morning. Your shirt smells like whatever your detergent thinks a flower smells like. Your hair smells like coconut, but you don't own a single coconut. You paid money so that nobody would ever find out what you actually smell like. And you did it to hide one thing: sweat. Here's the problem with that: sweat has no smell. None. Zero. It comes out of you clean. Basically water with a bit of salt in it. Sweat into a sealed jar, open it a week later, and it smells of nothing. So you're hiding from something that isn't there. Good start. And for 300,000 years, the thing that decided how a human smelled wasn't their body either. It was the thing they sat next to every night of their lives. So what did they actually smell like? And I don't mean bad. Bad isn't an answer. I mean specifically. 3 things, and we know the first one because somebody found it stuck in their teeth. Start with fire. For you, a fire is a nice evening. You sit near it, you go home, and your jacket smells of smoke for 2 days. You quite like it. For an ancient human, the fire never went out. Ever. It burned in the shelter all night. Every night, their whole life. We've got evidence of controlled fire at Qesem Cave in Israel going back 400,000 years, and maybe 1 million at Wonderwork in South Africa. Now, think about what 40 years of that does to a person. Smoke doesn't float past you. It sticks. The stuff in wood smoke is oily, and oily things soak into hair and skin and fur. And it never came off because nobody was washing it off. So a person who spent their whole life a few steps from an open fire slowly turned into a smoked object. Same thing we do to fish. You were jerky, and we're not guessing. In 2012, a team led by Karen Hardy looked at the teeth of 5 Neanderthals from a cave called El Sidrón in Spain, specifically the hard plaque on them. Plaque grabs whatever goes past and then turns to stone and keeps it forever. Inside it, they found smoke. Actual traces of wood smoke those people had breathed in. 50,000 years later, it's still there. And here's where I'll be honest. When I read that, I stopped feeling sorry for them because the smoke was helping. It kills bacteria. It stops meat going off, drives away mosquitoes and flies. Living inside a cloud of it meant fewer bites, fewer infections, food that lasted longer. They weren't putting up with the smell. The smell was the health plan. So that's number 1. Smoke. Not sometimes, always. That was the background smell of our entire species. Now the part you were actually worried about. Body odor is not made by you. I know that sounds like a technicality. It isn't. You have 2 types of sweat gland. The ones all over your body push out water to cool you down, and they smell of nothing. The other type sits in your armpits, switches on when you're a teenager, and pushes out something completely different. Thick, oily, full of fat. That also smells of nothing when it comes out. And then the bacteria arrive. There are bacteria living in your armpit right now whose entire job is to eat that oily stuff. They break it apart, and what they leave behind has a name: thioalcohols. And it is exactly the smell you are picturing. So body odor isn't your smell. It's the smell of something eating you. Your armpit is a farm. Sorry. And whether that farm exists comes down to 1 letter of your DNA. There's a gene called ABCC11. 1 spot on it, 1 letter. And it decides 2 things that sound completely unrelated: whether your earwax is wet or dry, and whether your armpits feed the bacteria. One version, sticky earwax and body odor. The other version, dry, flaky earwax and almost no smell at all. And the second version is not some rare thing. In East Asia, studies have put it somewhere between 80 and 95% of people. Stop and think about that. Body odor, a thing you assume every human has, is regional. Whole populations basically don't produce it. They just don't have the problem. Personally, I think that's the most unfair fact in this video. It also means there's no single answer to how ancient humans smelled. It depended which group you were standing in. One more thing. In 2023, researchers grew working copies of Neanderthal and Denisovan smell receptors in a lab. 11 of them. One Neanderthal receptor couldn't detect androstationone at all, a compound that to us smells like sweat. So there's a real chance they couldn't smell each other, which is arguably the greatest evolutionary advantage on this list. Third smell. And this one wasn't a person at all. Everything they owned came out of an animal. Clothes, bags, ropes, tents, and a fresh skin does one of 2 things. It rots, or you tan it. Tanning means rubbing brains into it. That's not a joke. Brain tissue is full of exactly the fats that turn a stiff skin into soft leather. There's an old saying among people who still do this: every animal has just about enough brain to tan its own hide, which is either very convenient or the darkest thing evolution has ever done. And in a lot of traditions before the brains, you soak the skin in stale urine to get the hair off. I have to be straight with you. Skins don't survive 50,000 years. We can't prove which method any particular group used. used. This bit is pieced together from tools, from marks on bones, and from people who still tan hides this way. Hold the details loosely. But the important part isn't the method, it's the location. That workshop wasn't somewhere else. It was the living room. So the real smell of a camp was smoke, wet fur, rotting fat, ammonia, cooking meat, and 20 people in one small dry space with nowhere else to go. You'd last 10 minutes. To them, that was the smell of being safe. It meant the fire was lit and they were inside. But here's the part nobody talks about. Could they even smell any of this? Because you've been told your whole life that human noses are rubbish, that dogs live in this rich world of smell, and we're basically blind to it. That is not true. And in 2017, a neuroscientist at Rutgers named John McGann worked out exactly where the lie came from. One guy, a French surgeon called Paul Broca, in 1879, noticed that the smell part of a human brain is small compared to the smell part of a dog's brain. That's it. That's the whole study. He didn't test a single person. He decided that humans had given up smell in exchange for free will, wrote it down, and everybody believed him. For 140 years. I want to be clear about how annoyed I am about this. Because McGann actually checked, humans can tell apart something like 1 trillion different smells. We've got about 400 working smell genes to a mouse's 1,000, and that number turns out not to predict what an animal can smell. On some chemicals, people beat dogs. Your nose was never the problem. The problem is your mouth. In 2014, two linguists, Asifa Majid and Nicholas Burenholt, did something beautifully simple. 10 Jahai men, hunter-gatherers from the rainforest in Malaysia, 10 American men, 12 smells, 80 color cards, and the same question every time. What is this? The Americans nailed the colors. Red, done. Average answer, 14 letters. Then the smells. Average answer, 66 letters. And they weren't answers. They were little stories. It's, you know that stuff dentists use. That's not a name. That's a hostage negotiation. And I do this too. Everybody does this. The Jahai did both the same way. Colors, about 5 letters. Smells, about 5 letters. They weren't describing anything, they were naming it. Because their language has proper words for smells the way English has proper words for colors. One of those words covers a smell shared by petrol, smoke, bat droppings, and certain millipedes. There's no English word for that. There doesn't need to be until your life depends on it. And I think this is the actual story here. It was never about the nose. It's about whether the world you live in forces you to say what you're smelling out loud. One last thing, and it's why any of this mattered. Everything you see and hear goes through a sorting office in your brain first. Smell doesn't. It goes straight to memory and emotion before you've even worked out what it is. So for most of human history, smell wasn't decoration. It was the filing system. Is that water safe? Is that meat still food? Is somebody in here sick? What walked past and how long ago? All of it stored in the fastest sense you have, by people who had the words to talk about it. So here's the full picture. They smelled of smoke permanently, and the smoke was keeping them alive. They smelled of bacteria rather than sweat, and how much depended on one letter of DNA that whole populations don't have. They smelled of the camp, fur, fat, ammonia, each other, and they could name all of it out loud in single words because they had to. And now look at us. There's a study out of Bristol that followed around 17,000 people. Of the ones carrying the genotype that makes body odor basically impossible, 78% buy deodorant anyway. 78% of people who cannot produce a smell are still paying every month to cover it up. That might be the most human statistic I have ever read. We spent 300,000 years reading the world with the fastest sense we own. Then we spent the last 100 trying to smell like absolutely nothing. And tomorrow morning, you'll do it again.